Thanks. Hey everyone, thanks for joining and welcome to the second panel of the Placing the Migration and Development Nexus double panel session, I guess. So as Karen mentioned in the first session, this panel is, as the name suggests, concerned with the relationship between migration and development, both of which are very broadly conceived. Migration, as we will see in the presentations to come, concerns not just international migration, but internal rural urban migration flows as well. Development, we're understanding to imply not just formal development policies and projects implemented at various scales, but also the structural process of development. So how do these two phenomena broadly conceived relate to one another? And we're suggesting that answers to this question can be obtained by looking at how they manifest in very place-specific situated settings. So we have a couple of really fascinating, distinct, but in many ways, I think, complementary papers that this panel is devoted to. To just quickly reiterate the format, each participant or each number of participants who are presenting a paper will have the opportunity to just give a brief 2-minute or so summary or pitch of the presentation, which, for those who don't know, is available to watch on the conference portal. So please do, if you haven't already, watched the full-length presentation. And then after this 2-minute pitch, we will have an open-ended discussion around the content of the presentations. So please do, for those in attendance, listen to this 2-minute pitch, have a think about what anything that comes to mind, either from your own research or further details that you would like to hear about the content of the presentation. And be ready to pose these either via the chat, if you so wish, or just raise your hand and you can pose the question to the panelists. So can I ask as you go, could I just ask our panelists to just introduce yourselves very briefly prior to your 2-minute pitch? I suggest we go in the order of the presentation as it appears on the conference portal. So that would mean that we first hear from Arun Kumar and Diksha Shriyan. So over to you, Arun and Diksha.
Great, thank you. I'll just have a quick introduction. My name is Arun and I'm a social development professional and a researcher. Trained in historical sociology and modern Indian history. And of late, after having worked for about 7-8 years in urban poverty space, I've started looking at migration and the informality of labor that we kind of observe as part of development story in India and I guess almost everywhere in the global south. Over to you, Diksha.
Hi, my name is Diksha. I am also a social development professional and a researcher. I'm trained in economics and in gender studies. This question of migration and informality actually has been of interest recently with my work in informality in Mumbai, India. So yeah, that's all. Go to the next one.
Great, I think we can just hear from your presentation, your 2-minute pitch, and then we'll move on.
Yes, we actually have a PPT, a very short PPT that will cover it in 3 minutes. I'm just going to share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me know when you can see my screen.
We can see it now.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so in this paper, we have looked at finding
Diksha, there is some issue with your connectivity.
We're not hearing you, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Nor seeing you, unfortunately.
Yeah. Should I? Could be. It could be because of the PPT.
Could be. If you want to see whether stopping sharing helps, stopping screen sharing. Okay.
All right.
Is she still with us, Diksha?
I guess not. So what I'll do, just in the interest of time, I'll kind of start. And
Sure.
if Diksha is back, then she could join us.
Perfect.
So,
Thanks.
yeah. What we have argued in our paper is that the picture of migration and urbanization in India cannot be viewed in its totality just with the monochromatic lens of political economy, invoking the pull and push factors, referring to low wages or no jobs at the point of origin and better opportunities at the point of destination. The rural social context and social relations influence when someone migrates, to where, for how long, and to do what, and so on. Not only that, it even has a bearing on the outcomes of the migration, as availability and quality of jobs, wages, formality, informality of labor relations, all seem to carry clear caste footprints. These findings are based on narratives from villages of Araria district in Bihar. 60% of its population is multidimensionally poor, making it a major supplier of cheap circular labor. Most of these laborers are Dalits, who are rendered the lowest in social hierarchy, over 80% of whom are landless. The district is flooded every year, causing excessive damage and uncertainty in agriculture. The lowered castes have historically migrated to escape from everyday humiliation by the dominant castes for credit and unemployment. Today, migration is circular because the low-paying, insecure jobs, lack of social security, and the cost of living in the city discourage lower caste migrants to make the move permanent. On an average, in a city, Dalit earns about 100 pounds, the middle caste groups 200 pounds, and the upper caste groups about 500 pounds per month. The difference in earning depends on a number of factors, including their access to land and education in the village and greater social network in the city, all connected to their inherited caste privileges. In India, 9 out of 10 in the workforce are in the informal sector. 84% of Dalit workforce are informal. This preponderance of Indian workforce in the informal sector suggests that informality has been formalized. Capitalism uses the existing social relations of power to ensure that cheap and vulnerable labor is available at all times. Without adequate social security and the right to vote at the destination, the labor remains vulnerable and quote unquote cheap, keeping the wages and in turn the cost of production down. Since it's circular and not permanent, its reproduction cost is also externalized. Clearly, it suits the system, the state, and the capital. The political economy of vulnerability in India and the global South in general is linked with the idea of mobile labor and sedentary citizenship. The latter is enforced through localized and discriminatory welfare and social security system. Given the fact that in today's globalized world, the caste-informed migration and informal labor force in India has a direct bearing on the market and consumption in the global North. Why do narratives on migration, urbanization, growth, and development continue to underplay the lens of caste? And finally, how do social relations of power write migration and development stories in other parts of the global South? Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Aaron and Diksha. And I really look forward to thinking through in the context of discussion, these really relevant questions that you pose at the end. Now we'll just move quickly on to our second 2-minute presentation summary, which is on the Hau Cao system in Vietnam, being presented by Edward Lahif, Nick Chisholm, and apologies, Phu An Thu. So over to you.
Thanks, Hassan, and greetings, colleagues. I'll just see if I can get this correct. Okay, so I have a very brief few points I want to make. Just in terms of background, I work in development studies. I'm currently based in my home city of Cork in Ireland, along with my colleague Nick Chisholm, and we're also joined by our co-author Thu Vu An from the University of the Social Sciences and Humanities in Hanoi, Vietnam, with whom we have been working for a number of years now on joint research and projects. So our title is Hau Cao for the 21st Century, question mark, the reform of household registration systems in Vietnam. And although it may not be come across explicitly as a political economy approach, thank you for reminding us, Arun, that's exactly what we are doing. And there are strong similarities, I think, which I didn't really expect with your paper. So that's something we can perhaps explore. Very briefly, Hau Cao was introduced in the late 50s, which imposed strict controls on population. For some people, it may be more. Some people may be more familiar with the equivalent Chinese system of Hau Cu, which is also, of course, Vietnam also being a socialist and one-party state. There are certain similarities, but also important differences. The process of social and economic reform in Vietnam, generally dated from the Doi Moi reforms in 1986, have initiated a more flexible approach, which linked to industrialization and the transformation of the economy. This has given rise to a system of circular migration, with migrant workers living precarious or temporary lives in the city and supporting families back in rural areas. The residency policy, official state residency policy, has intersected with employment practices to create a two-tier system of, on the one hand, permanent residents with often with formal employment rights, and temporary migrant workers with living largely in the informal economy. Migrants remain concentrated in informal employment, that being casual or self-employment, which is generally low paid with few social benefits or protections. Coming up to date, the 2020 law on residency, which is a major reform, signals a move from paper-based to electronic-based systems with a single national identity card and the rationalization of many administrative processes. There are within this benefits to the individual. Sorry, I'm just going to make that. I realize I have that on small. Benefits to the individual, where they have a single source of information, saving time and money, and benefits to the state in terms of less duplication, more accurate information for planning purposes, etc. It is our estimation that Hau Cao itself, as a measure of population control, is no longer the central issue when we're looking at the marginalization of migrants in urban Vietnam. Parallel reforms have been happening at various rates across areas like education, healthcare, social insurance, and employment. And these have the potential to deliver significant improvements in the quality of migrant lives. Housing, however, remains the greatest challenge, both as a barrier to permanent registration status or residency status, and in terms of quantity and quality of accommodation for migrants. And this is challenges for urban planning and housing policy. An accelerated shift from informal to formal employment, however, is the key to unlocking social benefits and protections for migrant workers. And we feel that the system of circular migration is likely to remain a reality for at least another generation. And therefore, policymakers must ensure that the benefits of growth and the development are shared by migrants in the cities and by the rural communities from which they come. And we have identified a couple of questions. I'm sorry we didn't share these in the original presentation, but they may be starting points for discussion. Number one, Does the current reform of residency policy in Vietnam adequately address the long-standing socioeconomic problems faced by rural urban migrants? And secondly, what more is needed to promote the social inclusion of migrants in Vietnam cities and to reduce the burden of migration on families? So I leave it there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Edward, for that presentation, which definitely speaks to the themes of the previous one, and I think also the points made in the previous panel about decentering migration and it not being a single analytical category or policy area for that matter, and it needs to be considered alongside of the other very and equally relevant areas that you mentioned. Okay, so we will now pass on to our third summary, which is from Iris Lim.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for organizers and also panelists for joining in on the discussion. My name is Iris, and I am teaching at SOAS. I'm also a researcher at Queen Mary University here in London. And my presentation today is really kind of pulled from my broader doctoral research, which looked at the human and lived experiences of the digital governance of migrants. And in particular, this paper presents the finding of this kind of invisible category of migrant digital brokers. So migrants who fill in the gaps of frontline digital work and digital kind of digital integration work that is kind of lacking in the kind of landscape of cuts to public services, and also this kind of move to more quote unquote efficient digitally delivered public services. And I think the significance of finding that currently the lack of resources kind of given to this category of digital broker, where a lot of the funding for digital inclusion will go to kind of community level organizations or government organizations, such as local community organizations, libraries, local councils, etc., in kind of providing services that try to close the digital divide. However, a lot of the work, kind of a significant amount of work that's really been kind of invisible until this point and isn't properly measured, is done by migrants themselves in helping to have the members of the community navigate this kind of new way of delivering public services. And I think in terms of kind of the wider significance, it's the thing that really resonated, I think, with Arun, your talk about this kind of informality being formalized, and also with I don't know if Edward mentioned it in the kind of little brief that was talked about, but this kind of change to e-governance and digital kind of registration programs. I think it really kind of draws attention to the need to kind of question these kind of new forms of neoliberal governance with the guise of under the guise of development, and how that really impacts the lives of migrants in this kind of post-migration and integration processes. So that's kind of a brief overview of the paper.
Thank you very much, Iris, for the fascinating summary and the paper itself, and for drawing the really relevant connections between the two preceding papers, as well as the broader aims of the panel. Cool. Okay, so last and definitely not least is Jaren Hamilolu from who will be speaking about drawing and walking as method. So please, over to you, Jaren.
Hi, I'm an architect and a PhD student in architectural design in Istanbul Technical University. And my paper was about Turkish-speaking migrants on Kingsland High Street, London. During my MA in architectural history, I was drawn to the street as a site that seemed very familiar and unfamiliar to me at the same time. So I wanted to explore this kinship along with subjectivity and the unseen aspects of the shops on the street as part of a course. So I adopted methods such as observation, drawing of the buildings, and unstructured interviews with shopkeepers to make the narratives coming from the shopkeepers visible. And while doing that, turning the project into physically turning it into a narrative in itself. So originally, I don't know if you have seen the video, but originally the 2 strips of drawings that were included in the video also included collages in the middle that I made as reflections on our conversations with the shopkeepers. So the main conclusion I drew out from this project was that it is simply impossible to group Turkish-speaking migrants and obviously any group into one ideologically homogeneous community, and that their positions shift through different political events such as the London riots, as I mentioned as part of the presentation. And another aspect was that I constantly thought about my own subjectivity during my site visits and during the project. So my questions regarding the panel are, how does the researcher's role play out during the course of the research? And the second group of questions would be, how can ethnographic research benefit from spatial methods? Drawing can be seen as a representational tool for architecture and perhaps in other fields as well, but could it also be used as a research method? Because the movement and settlement of migrant communities have direct spatial consequences. So how can spatial research methods be combined with ethnography or vice versa? And would these intersections lead to better development solutions? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for the topic, which really speaks to, and I think epitomizes the place-specific situatedness that the panel overall adheres to. And I mean, this goes for all of the panelists and all of the presentations. I would encourage our participants to watch the videos if you haven't done so already. But this one in particular, the visual element is extremely innovative and very much a part, as you've stated, Sharon, of the methods of the presentation, and by extension the arguments of the presentation. Okay, so if anyone from our participating audience would like to pose a question or a comment, either in response to the questions that have been posed at the end of each of our presentations, or just in relation to something else that has come to mind while listening, then please do either via the chat, or if you wish, just raise your hand and I can collect a couple. So over to you. And this can be general questions to the panel as a whole or to individuals. Okay, so we've got 2 so far. So we'll maybe I'll collect each of them. So Seb.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I've got a few questions for Edward and his team. I've just typed them up as well, so you can read them in case you can't hear me. But firstly, what will the costs be for the new online application? You know, are they going to be less than the previous system? 2, how complicated is the online technology? You know, is it going to be accessible for everyone, or will it be difficult for maybe less tech savvy, low educated migrants? And 3, I mean, I imagine in Vietnam that loads of people are just migrating to the city for temporary work or you know, precarious work, or going to sell things. They don't even bother with any of this registration for you know, do you think that will change now? Do you think it will be easy for them, or do you think they will continue to kind of go under the radar? So that's my questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'll just collect Anita's as well before turning back over to the panel.
Hi. I just had a thank you for all the presentations. It will surely help me for mine in the next session. Just wondering, how do you, to all the panelists, how do you define informal work or informal sector? Is it only limited to or mostly limited to migrant workers? Just a general question for everyone. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. If there aren't any more questions for the moment, I think we might turn back over to our panelists. So Edward, if you want to take the first question, and feel free to respond to the second as well, and then we can maybe turn over to the panel as a whole to respond to the second question about the definition of informality.
Thanks, Seth, for those questions. Great. I assume you're looking at the cost. I thought you were going to ask me about the cost of the IT system. I have no idea. To the cost of the state, the cost of the individual, of course. Now, I'm going to shamelessly hand over to my colleague Tu on this one, on the local detail. But my understanding is that the cost has either been nil or so low that it's not in any way barrier. But I'll stand corrected. The tech is likewise pretty straightforward. Help is available. We've seen people getting access to this. Now, obviously, the migrants don't tend to be the very young or the very old. They're obviously the working age population by and large. Reasonable levels of literacy, and as we know from the widespread mobile phone usage, reasonable levels of tech savvy. But it is a very important question, one we've noted in our paper, that it does present the possibility of certain groups being excluded to a degree. So I might ask my colleague Tu to come in on that in a moment to give us some more specifics. You're absolutely right. As I said in the presentation, circular migration will be here with, I didn't want to put a number on it. It's going to be for another generation, maybe two. And, we don't want to be erecting kind of moral judgments that, permanent urbanization is good, migrating from your rural home is bad. People will continue to make these choices. I think our argument is that up to now, they've been making those choices in their droves, but under very adverse conditions. Where they can't get their children into school, they can't get access to housing, our social welfare in the cities, our healthcare, and they've had to trek back to their rural homes to do this. I think the society and the government accept that migration and urbanization are here to stay. So I think you will see continued diversity. We don't feel from our more qualitative work, and it wouldn't make any quantitative claims, that there's going to be a huge flood of people moving permanently to the city. The socioeconomic realities don't really support that at this stage. But there are a lot of people who, especially younger people, better qualified, who will be looking to maybe establish a home and stay in the city longer term. People who really are turning their back on the urban area and don't need to hang on to that rice field as a just in case insurance policy, and they're willing to break their link to the rural area. But there's cultural dimensions to that too. So sorry, I'm answering it in quite general terms. And the compliance thing, I think it will be there will be advantages for individuals to, I don't mean to use the word in a sinister sense, to comply, to be compliant with the system. But of course, the 30-day, the hawkers and so forth who are, within a motorbike ride of the city or a bus ride and will come in for a week and sell their stuff, that will remain part of the reality as well. Absolutely. And just on Nita's point, sorry, I don't mean to hog at all. I suppose we have been using the word informality very much in the light of kind of ILO understandings of informal employment. And again, I wouldn't want to get technical on it, but the absence of a written agreement or contract of any sort, and therefore the absence of access to a lot of the benefits, whether it's from trade union membership to access to social welfare, employer contributions, paid maternity leave, all of those things that actually which flow from the possession of a written contract. Even in law in Vietnam, no written contract, you really don't have much of a leg to stand on. But unfortunately, there's a huge percentage of the population have no written contract. But government, and with a bit of gentle persuasion from organizations like the ILO, they have identified that at the transition to a more formalized working arrangement as being the key to lots of other benefits. So I suppose we are we are using a kind of a fairly general definition, Nita, rather than a highly technical one. But could I give it to 2 for a moment, if that's okay? I don't. Do you want it 2? Are you there? And can you comment on the cost or the complexity of the tech?
Yeah, thanks, Edward. So I think that from my experience in Hanoi, so I think that's no cost for registration electronic hotel now. But I think that from the law on residencies 2020, we saw that that is the most positive side in the process of reforming administrative procedure related to the citizen, because the citizen must not require to present additional paper for certifying the information, personal information, which is available in the database system. So so in the terms of temporary status, so I think that and now almost rural migrants have temporary status. One of the main reasons, so from our observation, is that because they have close relationship with their family in the country, especially they have interest or benefits from the land allocation, agricultural land allocation in the village. So they don't want to give up their permanent status in the village. You mean you understand what I mean? So they go to the city, but they accept to have temporary status in the city. And now from our interviews with the many migrants, rural migrants in the city, they don't care about whether they have temporary or permanent status in the city. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so perhaps we could go around the panel as a whole in the order in which we presented to respond to this question of Nita's about how you define formality or informality rather. But there are a few pointed questions in the chat, one to Iris and one to Edward and one for Aaron and Diksha. So I proposed that maybe we could you could address those in your response. And if I could just abuse my position as chair, could I also add a question to Jaren about how people, the migrants that you spoke to, how they perceived the process of gentrification of the neighborhood that you mentioned, I think, in passing in the presentation. And I guess, yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about migration and development, and gentrification being one particular form of capitalist development. So yeah, whether your respondents had any thoughts or experiences related to the process of gentrification. Okay, so maybe if Aaron and Diksha want to take the floor to respond.
Diksha, would you like to go first, or should I respond to Nita's question?
I go first and they can respond to her too. So on informality, I think when we have stuck to the documentation definition of having any sort of documentation, dividing them into formal and informal, but informality itself is a wide spectrum, right? So you have housing, you have labor, and you also have the question of who's counted and who's not counted. All of these three put together come into the debate of informality. So it does not become, especially in the Indian context that we have seen, it does not become only in the worker status, whether you're in the informal sector or not, but also housing, work, and whether you're counted or not, itself puts you in the spectrum of informality. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Nita. I think migration and informality are related, but migration is not the reason why labor has been informalized. The process of informalizing labor has been going on in many parts of the world, even where there is no such migration, or the migration is not at the same scale as we see, for instance, in South Asia. The informalization of worker is linked with, as Edward correctly said, absence of unionization, absence of political voice. If laborers are not allowed to vote, and where they migrate to, they do not have representation, they do not have wherewithal to impact the policy there. And because, as I said, we have kind of discussed it in our paper, longish paper, the welfare schemes continue to be linked to where you have migrated from. So your ration card, for instance, access to food security, for instance, remains limited to where you have migrated from, while you are doing labor, performing labor somewhere else. So what has happened is that by keeping labor mobile and all these welfare mechanisms sedentary, it helps the state, it helps the government, it helps the corporates to keep the production cost down. And especially since 92, 93, from the onset of neoliberal regime, this has further intensified.
Okay, great. Thank you. Over to Edward. And I just want to make us aware that we are at the formal approaching the formal ending time. We do have the option to extend for a number of minutes, but do bear in mind the 40-minute, approaching 40-minute time slot in your responses, please.
Very quickly. Now I noticed we didn't go through Iris, but that's okay. Maybe she might, unless she wants to. Let me go ahead while I have it. Very quickly on the question in the chat from Ziji Lin on why will migration continue? Well, I think the simple answer is that it's very expensive to move to the city, and especially for families. So to establish proper housing and the more administrative barriers as well up to now to health and insurance, health and education has meant that there's been strong arguments for, as it were, keeping your family back in the rural area. And as Tu has mentioned as well, the dual lifestyle or livelihood of having access to agricultural land, which can't actually support people's, fully, but it does give them a bit of a safety net and a place to go back to. So there's, if times are bad in the city, and we saw that during COVID, a huge exodus back to the rural areas. So cities are crowded. And this brings us almost to Hassan's point as well in a moment. Cities are crowded, people are living very close together in small rooms, and rents are expensive. So I think purely on economic grounds, people won't just make suddenly up sticks and move to the city. And as I say, official policy hasn't encouraged that. There's not enough housing, there's not enough space, there's not enough social services to absorb all of the people. So I think we'll see people having this dual lifestyle. And as I say, there are social and cultural reasons as well why people may not move to the city in their entirety. And Hassan, just very briefly on gentrification, yes, the cities, I suppose, are segregated on economic grounds, as most cities in the world are. But if anybody knows Vietnam or similar regions in Southeast Asia, they're also very, very crowded. By our Western European standards. So there are affluent families living very, very close to much poorer houses where people are living in one room. What you don't see in Vietnam, and it may be a product of its particular political setup, is large areas of informal housing. So you see more formal housing, which has been subdivided, and people living in one room, but you don't see what would be recognized in Africa or other parts of Asia, perhaps, or South America as slum or shanty development. So you're not getting that same sort of pushback. I don't know if anybody else in the team wants to comment on that social tensions between different groups, but I certainly haven't been aware of it as a major issue. Yeah, so thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll move to Iris and then Jaren.
Hi. So yeah, is it Chin? Please correct my pronunciation. Thank you for the question. So in regarding the selection of Seoul and London as my case studies, is because actually the UK and South Korea are consistently voted two of the top digital government systems in the world due to especially the UN e-government ranking. They also have quite dynamic, differing but quite dynamic context of migration. So the UK having kind of a longer history of migration relative to Korea, but Korea having had an increase of migrant population of almost kind of 300% since the 2000s. Since 2000, so quite rapidly changing dynamic context, and also quite a lot of investment from the government itself in kind of efforts to try to digitally govern migrant populations. So it was quite a context that was quite ripe for study. In terms of kind of informality, I didn't necessarily directly engage with any kind of formal concept of informality, but I do think there's this kind of tension that comes through within the findings around this idea of, as Arun mentioned earlier, this kind of like informality becoming formalized through this kind of chronically under-resourced, chronically invisibilized context in which public services are being delivered online, and what that means for, you know, this kind of formalization of these contexts, and how people in some ways kind of chronically ignore major gaps within the system, and how that kind of translates into impact on migrant populations. So that was kind of a connection I was trying to draw the different parts of the.
Thanks, Iris. And we can go over to Jaren. I see a question in the chat directed to you as well about acculturation, which you can feel free to address if you wish as well.
Yeah, okay. In terms of the informal sector, I actually did not define one in my presentation, but I don't know if the informal sector is strictly limited to migrant workers, but the Turkish-speaking migrants that I spoke to as part of my research were actually in majority very formal workers, in that they owned the shops, and they were either like owning the shops or renting the shops. There were the occasional, I guess, informally paid workers within the shops, but I can definitely say that the migrant workers are not strictly in the informal sector, I guess. Regarding Hassan's question, there was actually not much talking about the gentrification issue, other than the occasional remarks about how the area has changed since they immigrated to the street as working there, and then also they live in the surrounding neighborhoods, so close to Kingsland High Street. But there wasn't a very systematized kind of aggression towards gentrification or the increasing costs and rents within the area. To respond to Nian's question, are Turkish immigrants accustomation to the city life is a form of acculturation? I'm not sure how to respond to this, as I said that, as I mentioned before, it's just really impossible to sort of refer to Turkish immigrants as this homogenous group of people in which some are getting accultured while getting accustomed, and others are not. And maybe it's better to respond to this with a question as well. How would we define acculturation? Like is it changing their everyday habits that they used to have in Turkey, or is it adopting some of the daily habits that are available to them because of living in London or being able to work on Kingston High Street. So I'm not really sure to how to like respond to that, but I guess I would say no, because the way they accustom to the city is through certain tactics that they help them to either like short circuit certain rules or help them find ways of implementing their own habits within that system. I don't know if that responds to your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaren, and everyone for these really stimulating responses and presentations that simultaneously upended so many received policy and analytical categories, while also doing so in a way that's very empirically grounded and evidence-based. I see a lot of questions still and engagement happening in the chat, and I personally have a range of further questions and comments that I'd like to pursue about all of these presentations, but we have already run over our allotted 40 minutes. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up the this particular panel now, but I'm sure that there are many, many avenues for further exploration of the common themes that have been examined. So I'm just going to finish by saying thank you very much, both to all of our panelists and presenters, as well as our audience participants, for making it a very exciting discussion. And have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, Hassan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Hassan.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.